My name is Madeline Carter, and I never imagined that the man I shared my bed with for 7 years would orchestrate such an elaborate scheme to steal everything my grandfather left me. But then again, I never imagined a lot of things about Ethan until it was almost too late. The morning Grandpa Walter died, I felt like someone had ripped out a piece of my soul. He wasn't just my grandfather, he was the man who raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 8. He taught me how to ride a bike in the driveway of our family home, how to balance a checkbook when I was barely 13, and most importantly, how to trust my instincts when something didn't feel right. I should have listened to that last lesson more carefully. The funeral was a blur of black clothing and sympathetic faces. Ethan stood beside me, his arm wrapped protectively around my shoulders as person after person offered their condolences. He was the picture of a supportive husband, whispering words of comfort when I broke down during the eulogy, holding my hand when they lowered the casket into the ground. "I'm here for you, baby," he murmured against my hair as we stood at the graveside. "Whatever you need, I'll take care of everything." At the time, those words felt like a lifeline. Looking back now, they were the first warning sign I chose to ignore. 3 days after the funeral, Grandpa Walter's lawyer, Mr. Henderson, called me to his office for the reading of the will. Ethan insisted on coming with me. Of course. "You shouldn't have to face this alone," he said, straightening his tie in our bedroom mirror. "Besides, as your husband, I should be there to help you understand any legal complexities." The law office smelled like old leather and coffee, a combination that somehow made me think of Grandpa Walter. He'd loved his morning coffee, black with just a hint of sugar, always drunk from the same chipped mug I'd painted for him in elementary school. Mr. Henderson was a thin man in his 60s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He'd been Grandpa's lawyer for as long as I could remember, handling everything from the family business to minor legal disputes with suppliers. "Madeline," he said warmly, shaking my hand before nodding politely to Ethan. "Please, have a seat. Can I get you anything? Water, coffee?" "No, thank you," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's hand found mine, squeezing gently. Mr. Henderson settled behind his desk and opened a manila folder. "Your grandfather's will is quite straightforward," he began. "He's left everything to you. Madeline, the house on Maple Street, Carter's home and hardware stores, and his investment portfolio." My breath caught. I knew Grandpa had done well for himself, building the hardware business from a single store to a small chain of 5 locations across the state. But I hadn't expected him to leave me everything. "The total value of the estate," Mr. Henderson continued, "is approximately $3 million. Ethan's hand tightened around mine. I could feel the slight tremor in his fingers, though his face remained composed. "There is also this," Mr. Henderson said, sliding an envelope across the desk. "Walter asked me to give this to you personally. He said it was for your eyes only." The envelope was cream-colored, my name written across the front in Grandpa's shaky handwriting. I tucked it into my purse, planning to read it later when I was alone. "Are there any conditions?" Ethan asked, leaning forward slightly. "Any trusts or restrictions on how the assets can be used?" Mr. Henderson's eyes flickered to Ethan, then back to me. "No restrictions. Walter trusted Madeline completely. Everything transfers to her name once we complete the probate process." "How long will that take?" Ethan pressed. "Typically 6 to 8 weeks, assuming no one contests the will." "Why would anyone contest it?" I asked, finding my voice. "I'm his only living relative." "Just a formality," Mr. Henderson assured me. "I don't anticipate any issues." We left the office 20 minutes later, after signing preliminary paperwork. Ethan was unusually quiet as we walked to the car, his jaw tight with what I assumed was concentration. $3 million, he finally said as we pulled out of the parking lot. "That's life-changing money, Maddie." "It doesn't feel real," I admitted, watching the familiar streets of our town blur past the window. "I keep thinking I'll wake up and Grandpa will still be alive, telling me stories about the store while we eat Sunday dinner." "Hey," Ethan said softly, reaching over to squeeze my knee. He loved you. He wanted to make sure you were taken care of. That's what this is about. That night, after Ethan had gone to bed, I sat in our living room and opened Grandpa's letter. His handwriting, once so strong and sure, wavered across the page. My dearest Madeline, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And you're probably feeling lost. I wish I could be there to help you through this. But since I can't, I want to leave you with some words of wisdom. First, know that I love you more than words can express. You've been the light of my life since the day your parents brought you home from the hospital. Raising you after we lost them was the greatest privilege of my life. Second, and this is important, sweetheart, guard your heart and your assets carefully. I know you love Ethan, and I hope I'm wrong about my concerns, but I've been in business long enough to recognize certain patterns. He asks a lot of questions about money, pushes for joint accounts, and I've noticed how he looks at the stores when he thinks no one is watching. I'm not saying he doesn't love you. I'm saying that sometimes people can love you and still make choices that hurt you. The money and businesses I'm leaving you represent decades of hard work and sacrifice. They're your security, your independence. Don't let anyone pressure you into giving that up. Trust your instincts, my dear one. You're smarter than you give yourself credit for. And you have more strength than you know. Whatever happens, remember that you don't owe anyone access to what I've left you. It's yours, to do with as you see fit. All my love, Grandpa Walter. If you ever feel uncertain, talk to Olivia. She's sharp as a tack and loyal as they come. I trust her to look out for you. I read the letter 3 times, each word sinking deeper into my consciousness. Olivia Matthews had been my best friend since college and was now a successful attorney specializing in estate law. Grandpa had always liked her, saying she had a good head on her shoulders. The bedroom door creaked open, and Ethan appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. Maddie, it's past midnight. Come to bed. I folded the letter quickly, sliding it under a magazine on the coffee table. Just needed some time to think, I said, forcing a smile. He crossed the room and sat beside me, pulling me against his chest. I know this is hard, but we'll get through it together. We're a team. Remember? Yeah, I whispered against his shirt. A team. Over the next few weeks, Ethan's behavior shifted in subtle ways. He started bringing up the inheritance in casual conversation, always framing it in terms of our future and smart financial planning. I was thinking, he said one morning over breakfast, we should meet with a financial advisor. $3 million is a lot to manage, and we want to make sure we're maximizing our investments. Maybe after probate is finished, I said, focusing on my scrambled eggs. But we could start planning now. Get ahead of things. He reached across the table to take my hand. I found this great firm downtown. They specialize in wealth management for inheritances. Ethan, it's been 3 weeks since the funeral. Can we just take a breath? His face tightened for a fraction of a second before smoothing into an understanding smile. Of course, I'm sorry. Baby. I just want to make sure we're being responsible. The we bothered me more than I wanted to admit. This was my inheritance, left to me by my grandfather. But Ethan was my husband. Didn't that make it ours by default? A few days later, I overheard a phone conversation that made my skin crawl. I'd come home early from work with a headache and was heading upstairs when I heard Ethan's voice from his home office. No, not yet. He was saying, she's being stubborn about it. I know. Look, I've been married to her for 7 years. I know how to handle Madeline. The stores alone are worth at least $1.5 million. The real money is in the real estate. Trust me, I'll get her to see reason. We just need to be patient. I pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering. Who was he talking to? And what exactly was he trying to get me to see reason about? The prenup isn't ironclad, he continued, and my blood turned to ice. We didn't have a prenup. We'd married young and in love, with nothing to our names but student debt and dreams. Her grandfather made sure the inheritance would be separate property, but there are ways around that. Yes, I understand. 6 months should be plenty of time. I crept back downstairs and out the front door, driving aimlessly for an hour while my mind raced. When I finally returned home, Ethan greeted me with a kiss and asked about my day as if nothing had happened. That night, I called Olivia. "I need to see you," I said without preamble when she answered. "It's about the inheritance. And Ethan—" "Come by my office tomorrow," she said immediately, her lawyer instincts clearly picking up on my distress. 10 o'clock. I'll be there. Olivia's office was in a converted Victorian house near the courthouse. She'd gone out on her own 2 years ago, building a practice focused on protecting women's assets in divorce and inheritance cases. I'd been so proud of her then. Now, I was grateful for her expertise. "Tell me everything," she said once we were settled in her office with cups of tea. I started with the phone conversation and worked backward, including Grandpa's letter and Ethan's increasing pressure about financial planning. Olivia took notes, her expression growing more concerned with each detail. "Maddie," she said when I finished, "I need you to listen carefully. What Ethan is doing shows clear signs of financial manipulation. The fact that he's discussing your separate property inheritance with someone else, making plans for money that isn't his. These are major red flags." "But we're married," I said weakly. "Doesn't that mean—" "No." Olivia's voice was firm. "Inheritance is separate property in this state, especially when explicitly left to one spouse. Unless you commingle the funds or add his name to accounts, that money remains yours alone. The fact that he mentioned a prenup you don't have suggests he's either lying to someone or planning something. What should I do? First, do not sign anything he puts in front of you. Nothing, not even a grocery receipt. Second, I want you to quietly start documenting everything. Save any emails or texts about money, if possible, record conversations. Third, open a separate bank account at a different bank and have all inheritance-related correspondence sent to a P.O. box only you know about. That seems so deceptive." Olivia leaned forward, her dark eyes serious. "Maddie, your grandfather warned you for a reason. He saw something in Ethan that concerned him. You owe it to yourself and to Walter's memory to protect what he left you." I left Olivia's office with a mixture of determination and dread. Part of me wanted to confront Ethan directly, but Olivia had advised against it. "Gather information first," she'd said. "Know exactly what you're dealing with before you make any moves." Over the next 2 weeks, I became a detective in my own home. I noticed things I'd previously overlooked: how Ethan had access to all our joint accounts but kept his business account separate, how he'd incorporated his consulting firm in Delaware despite us living in Ohio, how he always insisted on handling our taxes himself. The financial advisor meetings began in earnest. Ethan would casually mention that Brad from Pinnacle Wealth wants to grab lunch, or Jennifer from Strategic Financial called with an interesting opportunity. Each time, I deflected, claimed work conflicts, or simply said I wasn't ready. His frustration grew more visible with each refusal. "Maddie, you're being ridiculous," he snapped one evening after I'd declined another meeting. "This is our future we're talking about. Don't you trust me?" "Of course I trust you," I lied, the words tasting bitter. "I just need more time." "Time for what? Your grandfather's been dead for 2 months. The probate will be finished soon. We need a plan." "My grandfather," I said quietly, emphasizing the pronoun. "My loss, my inheritance, my timeline." His face flushed red. "So that's how it is, 7 years of marriage, and suddenly it's all mine instead of ours." "That's not what I meant." "Isn't it?" He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I've supported you through everything, Maddie. When you wanted to quit your job to help your grandfather with the stores, who paid the bills? When you needed time off for his doctor's appointments, who picked up the slack? I never asked you to—" "You didn't have to ask. That's what husbands do. We support our wives. And when something good happens, we share in that too. That's what marriage means." He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I sat at the kitchen table, shaking, wondering how we'd gotten here. The man who'd held me at my grandfather's funeral seemed like a stranger compared to the one who'd just berated me for not immediately turning over my inheritance to financial planners. The next morning, Ethan apologized with flowers and breakfast in bed. "I was out of line," he said, looking genuinely contrite. "I'm just stressed about work, and I took it out on you. Forgive me." I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe that this was all a misunderstanding, that my husband of 7 years hadn't turned into someone I didn't recognize the moment money entered the picture. "There's something I should tell you," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "My consulting firm. We lost a major client last month. Things have been tight." "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't want to burden you while you were grieving." He took my hand, his thumb rubbing circles on my palm. "But with the inheritance coming, it feels like a lifeline, for both of us." There it was. The truth. Finally. Not concern for my financial future, but desperation for his own. "How much do you need?" I asked carefully. "It's not about need," he said quickly. Too quickly. "I just thought if we had access to capital, I could expand the business, take on bigger clients, build something really substantial for our future." "How much, Ethan?" He looked away. "The initial investment would be around $200,000, but the returns, $200,000. I pulled my hand away. "You want me to give you $200,000 of my inheritance for your business?" "Not give, invest. There's a difference." "Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you've been planning this since the moment you heard about the will." "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" I was surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. The financial advisors, the pressure to make plans, the sudden revelation about your business troubles. "Tell me, Ethan, when exactly were you planning to ask for this investment, before or after you got me to sign papers putting your name on everything?" His face went through several expressions before settling on wounded indignation. "I can't believe you're accusing me of... What's some kind of scheme? I'm your husband." "Yes," I said quietly. "You are, which is why this hurts so much." I got out of bed and locked myself in the bathroom, ignoring his knocks and pleas to talk. When I finally emerged, he was gone, leaving only a note saying he'd be at his mother's for a few days to give us both space to think. That evening, I called Olivia and told her about the conversation. "200,000, she repeated. "And I bet that's just the starting number. Maddie, you need to be very careful now. When people feel entitled to money that isn't theirs, they can become desperate." "What do you mean?" "I mean that if he can't convince you to give him the money willingly, he might try other methods: legal manipulation, emotional blackmail, even forging signatures. I've seen it all." "Ethan wouldn't." "The Ethan you married wouldn't. But financial stress changes people. It brings out aspects of their character that were always there but hidden. Your grandfather saw it. Now you're seeing it too." She was right, of course. The signs had probably been there all along. Little red flags I'd explained away because I was in love. The way he'd insisted on managing our joint finances. How he'd pushed for expensive vacations we couldn't afford, always saying we'd figure it out later. The business ventures that never quite panned out, always someone else's fault. 3 days passed before Ethan returned home. He was contrite, bringing dinner from my favorite restaurant and proposing a weekend getaway to reconnect. I played along, trying to buy time while I figured out my next move. Then came the family dinner invitation. "Mom wants us to come for lunch on Saturday," Ethan said casually over morning coffee. "She feels bad that she hasn't been there for you since the funeral." Patricia Carter had never liked me. In 7 years of marriage, she'd made it clear that she thought her son had married beneath him. The idea that she suddenly wanted to comfort me in my grief was laughable. "Just lunch?" I asked. "Well, my brother James will be there too. You know how Mom likes her family gatherings." James was a real estate attorney who specialized in property transfers and estate planning. My internal alarm bells started ringing. "I actually have plans with Olivia on Saturday," I said. "Cancel them." His tone was sharper than usual. This is important to Mom. And frankly, Maddie, you've been spending a lot of time with Olivia lately. It's starting to feel like you're choosing her over your family. She's my best friend, and I'm your husband. My family is your family. Or at least, that's how it's supposed to work. I looked at him across the breakfast table. This man I'd once loved so desperately I thought I'd die without him. When had he become someone who used emotional manipulation as casually as breathing? Fine, I said. What time? Noon. And Maddie. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Try to be open-minded. Mom and James just want to help. I'm sure they did, I thought. Help themselves to my inheritance. That evening, I met Olivia for an emergency strategy session. We sat in her car in a parking lot, away from anywhere Ethan might think to look for me. They're going to ambush you, she said flatly. This has setup written all over it. James being there is the tell. They're going to present you with documents and pressure you to sign. What kind of documents? Could be anything. Power of attorney forms, property transfer deeds, investment authorizations. Hell, I've seen families try to get vulnerable inheritors to sign conservatorship papers, claiming they're not emotionally capable of handling large sums. They can't force me to sign anything. No, but they can make you feel like a selfish monster for refusing. They'll talk about family, about trust, about Ethan's struggles. They'll make it seem like you're destroying your marriage over money. Maybe I am, I said quietly. Olivia grabbed my shoulders, forcing me to look at her. No, you're protecting yourself from financial abuse. There's a massive difference. Your grandfather left that money to you, not to Ethan, not to his family. He did that for a reason. So what do I do? A slow smile spread across her face. You said they're expecting you at noon. Yes. Perfect. Here's what we're going to do. Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that normally would have lifted my spirits. Instead, I dressed carefully in a conservative blue dress and pearls, the picture of a dutiful daughter-in-law. Ethan nodded approvingly when he saw me. You look beautiful, he said, kissing my cheek. Mom will appreciate the effort. The drive to Patricia's house took 40 minutes. Ethan filled the silence with casual chatter about work, the weather, anything except the real reason for this visit. I responded appropriately while mentally rehearsing the plan Olivia and I had developed. Patricia lived in a sprawling colonial in the city's most exclusive neighborhood. The house had been in her family for generations, a fact she never let anyone forget. As we pulled into the circular driveway, I spotted James's BMW already parked near the door. Looks like James is here early, I commented. He's always been punctual, Ethan said, a note of something I couldn't identify in his voice. Anticipation, nervousness. Patricia greeted us at the door wearing a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. Her smile was as cool as always, though she made a show of kissing my cheek. Madeline, dear, so good of you to come. How are you holding up? I'm managing, I said, allowing her to lead us into the formal living room. James stood by the fireplace, looking every inch the successful attorney in his tailored suit. But it was the two other men in the room that made my pulse quicken. I didn't recognize them, but their expensive suits and leather briefcases told me exactly who they were. Madeline, James said smoothly, I'd like you to meet Robert Sinclair and Thomas Webb. They're associates from my firm who specialize in estate planning. How thoughtful, I said, taking a seat on the sofa. Ethan sat beside me, his hand immediately finding mine. Though I wasn't aware we were having a business meeting, I thought this was a family lunch. Patricia waved dismissively. Oh, we'll have lunch after. But James mentioned he had some ideas about protecting your inheritance, and we thought it best to discuss it as a family. Protecting it from whom? I asked innocently. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Robert Sinclair cleared his throat and opened his briefcase. Mrs. Carter, we understand you've recently come into a substantial inheritance. In cases like these, it's crucial to ensure the assets are properly managed and protected from potential tax liabilities. I have an attorney, I said. Olivia Matthews. James said with barely concealed disdain. Yes, we're aware, but with all due respect, she's a small-town lawyer with limited experience in high-value estates. You need specialists. What I need, I said carefully, is to understand why my husband brought me to his mother's house under false pretenses for an ambush meeting with attorneys I didn't request. Ethan's hand tightened on mine. Maddie, that's not what this is. We're trying to help. By lying to me. No one lied, Patricia interjected. We simply thought it would be easier to have this conversation in a comfortable, family setting. Thomas Webb pulled out a stack of documents. These are simply preliminary forms to begin the process of establishing a family trust. It would protect the assets while ensuring both you and your husband have equal access and control. Equal control, I repeated, over my inheritance. Our inheritance, Ethan corrected softly. We're married, Maddie. What's yours is mine. Actually, I said, that's not how inheritance law works in this state. Something I'm sure your brother explained to you when you were planning this little intervention. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Patricia's face hardened while James shifted uncomfortably. There's no need for hostility, Robert Sinclair said in what I'm sure he thought was a soothing tone. We're all on the same side here. These documents would simply streamline the management of the estate, allowing for better investment opportunities and tax advantages. May I see these documents? I asked. He handed them over eagerly. I made a show of flipping through them, though Olivia had already prepared me for what I'd find. Transfer of ownership forms, power of attorney documents, and buried in the middle, a declaration that would convert my separate property inheritance into community property. This is interesting, I said, holding up one page. This section here seems to give my husband sole signing authority on any transactions over $10,000. Why would I agree to that? It's standard language, Thomas Webb said quickly, meant to protect against fraud. By giving someone else control over my money, Maddie, please, Ethan said, his voice taking on that wounded tone I'd once found so convincing. You're making this adversarial when it doesn't need to be. No one's trying to take anything from you. We want to protect our future, build something together with Grandpa Walter's legacy. Our future? I stood up, clutching the papers. Like the future you were discussing on the phone 2 weeks ago, the one where you told someone the stores alone were worth $1.5 million, the one where you mentioned 6 months would be plenty of time to get around my grandfather's wishes. Ethan's face went white. I don't know what you're talking about. Really, because I have the recording. That was a bluff. Ohio was a one-party consent state, but I hadn't actually recorded him. But he didn't know that, and his guilty expression told me everything I needed to know. You recorded me, his voice rose. In our own home, what kind of wife does that? The kind whose husband plots to steal her inheritance. I shot back. Now hold on. James stood up, ever the mediator. Let's all calm down. Madeline, no one is plotting anything. These are simply smart financial documents that would benefit everyone. Everyone except me. I turned to Patricia. Tell me, did you help plan this? Or was it all your son's idea? Patricia's lips pursed. I don't appreciate your tone, young lady. We're trying to help you avoid making emotional decisions with your grandfather's money. Clearly, you're not thinking rationally. Oh, I'm thinking very rationally. I looked at my watch. In fact, I'm thinking so rationally that I asked someone to join us. She should be here right about... The doorbell rang. Who is that? Ethan demanded. I smiled. Why don't you answer it and find out? He looked at his mother, then at James, clearly trying to decide if this was part of their plan or mine. Finally, Patricia nodded to her housekeeper, who'd been hovering in the doorway. 30 seconds later, Olivia Matthews walked into the room like an avenging angel in a power suit. She surveyed the scene with sharp eyes, taking in the lawyers, their briefcases, and the papers in my hand. Gentlemen, she said coolly, I'm Olivia Matthews, Mrs. Carter's attorney. I understand you've been presenting my client with documents to sign without her legal representation present. I'm sure that was just an oversight on your part. Robert Sinclair and Thomas Webb exchanged glances. We weren't aware Mrs. Carter would be bringing counsel to a family gathering, Sinclair said. Funny, Olivia replied. She wasn't aware she'd need counsel at a family gathering. May I see the documents you've prepared? I handed them over. Olivia's expression grew darker as she flipped through them. Interesting, she murmured. Mr. Sinclair, are you aware that what you've prepared here could be construed as an attempt to fraudulently convert separate property? The language is deliberately misleading, buried in subsections that a layperson might miss. That's a serious accusation, James said stiffly. Yes, it is. Olivia pulled out her phone. So serious that I think we should document this meeting. For the record, my client was invited here under the pretense of a family lunch, only to be presented with legal documents that would effectively strip her of her inheritance. Documents prepared by attorneys who, I assume, were fully aware of the implications. This is ridiculous, Patricia snapped. We're trying to protect family assets. They're not family assets, Olivia corrected. They're Madeline's assets, left to her specifically by Walter Morrison. Assets that, according to these documents, would be transferred to a trust controlled primarily by Ethan Carter, who coincidentally owes approximately $200,000 in business debts. How do you know about that? Ethan demanded. Olivia smiled coldly. Discovery is a wonderful thing. Did you really think you could hide your financial troubles while simultaneously trying to access your wife's inheritance? Those debts are from investments in our future, Ethan said desperately. Maddie knows about them. I knew about them 3 days ago, I said quietly. After months of you hiding them, after you'd already started planning how to use my grandfather's money to solve your problems. Our problems, Ethan shouted. We're married. Your problems are my problems, and mine are yours. No, I said firmly. Your business debts are not my responsibility, and my inheritance is not your solution. Thomas Webb began quietly packing his briefcase. I think perhaps we should... Sit down, Olivia commanded. We're not done here. I want to make something very clear to everyone in this room. Any further attempts to manipulate, coerce, or deceive my client into signing over her inheritance will be met with immediate legal action. That includes harassment, financial abuse charges, and bar complaints against any attorneys involved. You can't threaten us, James said, but his voice lacked conviction. I'm not threatening, I'm promising. Olivia pulled out a folder from her bag. I've already documented several instances of financial manipulation and emotional abuse. Phone records showing discussions about Mrs. Carter's inheritance before she was informed. Bank records showing unusual transfers from joint accounts. Would you like me to continue? The room was silent. Patricia looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. James was studying his shoes. The two attorneys were clearly calculating how fast they could leave without seeming guilty. But it was Ethan's face that broke my heart. The mask had finally slipped completely, revealing someone I didn't recognize. The loving husband was gone, replaced by a desperate man who'd seen his plan crumble. 7 years, he said bitterly. 7 years I've been with you, supported you, loved you. And this is how you repay me, by treating me like some kind of criminal. You treated yourself like one the moment you started plotting to take what wasn't yours. I said. Grandpa Walter saw it. He tried to warn me. I just didn't want to believe it. Your grandfather was a paranoid old man who poisoned you against me. Ethan spat. My grandfather, I said, standing straighter, was the wisest man I ever knew, and he was right about you. I turned to Patricia. I'll be filing for divorce on Monday. I suggest you advise your son to cooperate fully, or things will get much more unpleasant than they need to be. You can't just, she started. Yes, I can. I moved toward the door, Olivia beside me. And I will. Ethan can expect to hear from my attorney about separating our assets. Given the circumstances, I don't anticipate being generous. Maddie, wait, Ethan called out, his voice suddenly pleading. Let's talk about this. We can work it out. I love you. I paused at the doorway, looking back at the man I'd once promised to love forever. No, Ethan. You love the idea of my money. There's a difference. Olivia and I walked out together, leaving behind the shattered remains of what I'd once thought was a happy marriage. As we reached our cars, I realized my hands were shaking. You did great in there, Olivia said, squeezing my shoulder. I know that wasn't easy. It was horrible, I admitted. But also, liberating, does that make sense? Perfect sense. You just stood up to a room full of people trying to manipulate you and won. Your grandfather would be proud. As I drove home, to what would soon be just my home, not ours, I thought about Grandpa Walter. About the lessons he'd taught me. The strength he'd always said I had even when I didn't believe it myself. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Ethan fought it at first, trying every trick in the book to claim part of the inheritance. But Olivia was relentless, and the evidence of his manipulation was overwhelming. In the end, he walked away with what he'd brought to the marriage, his debts and his damaged pride. I kept the house on Maple Street, the one Grandpa Walter had raised me in. The hardware stores continued to thrive under my management, and I even opened a 6th location. But the most meaningful thing I did with the inheritance was establish the Walter Morrison Foundation, providing financial literacy education and legal resources to women facing economic abuse. The foundation's office is in the old carriage house behind the main property. I converted it myself, keeping Grandpa's workshop in the back where he used to teach me how to fix things with my own 2 hands. It seemed fitting. He taught me to repair broken furniture. And now I was helping repair broken lives. On the first anniversary of his death, I stood in that workshop, running my hands over his old tools. The letter he'd left me was framed on the wall, a daily reminder of his wisdom and love. I kept my promise. Grandpa, I whispered to the empty room that still somehow smelled like sawdust and his cologne. I didn't let anyone take what you left me, and now I'm using it to help others the way you helped me. There was no answer, of course, but as sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, I could almost feel his presence, his approval, his pride. I'd lost a husband but kept my inheritance. More importantly, I'd kept my self-respect and discovered a strength I never knew I had. And in the end, that was worth more than all the money in the world. The foundation's first client arrived that afternoon, a young woman whose boyfriend was pressuring her to add his name to her recently inherited family home. As I listened to her story, so similar to my own, I smiled and pulled out a legal pad. Let me tell you what my grandfather once told me, I began. You don't owe anyone access to what's yours. Now, let's talk about how we're going to protect your assets and your future. She relaxed into her chair, hope flickering in her eyes, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that this was what Grandpa Walter had really left me. Not just money or property, but the ability to stand strong and help others do the same. The money was just a tool. The real inheritance was the strength to use it wisely, the courage to protect it fiercely, and the wisdom to know that sometimes the people who claim to love us are the ones we need to guard against the most. As the young woman left with resources and a plan, I touched the framed letter on the wall once more. Thank you, Grandpa, I said softly, for everything. Outside, the afternoon sun warmed the garden where Grandpa and I used to sit and talk about life, about business, about the importance of knowing your worth. The roses he'd planted were blooming, their scent drifting through the open window. Life went on, different than I'd planned, but perhaps exactly as it was meant to be. I had work to do, a business to run, and women to help. But first, I made myself a cup of coffee, black with just a hint of sugar, the way Grandpa liked it, and raised it in a silent toast to the man who'd seen the truth when I couldn't, who'd loved me enough to protect me even after he was gone. The ceramic mug was chipped along the rim, the same one I'd painted for him all those years ago. He'd used it every morning until the day he died, refusing to replace it despite my offers to make him a new one. It's perfect because you made it, he'd always said. The imperfections just add character. Now I understood what he meant. Life's imperfections, the cracks, the betrayals, the hard truths we don't want to face, they all add character. They make us stronger, wiser, more compassionate. I'd walked into that ambush at Patricia's house as one person and walked out as another. The old Madeline might have signed those papers, might have let guilt and manipulation win. But the woman I'd become, the woman Grandpa always knew I could be, had stood her ground. And that, more than any amount of money, was my true inheritance.